I think Cheryl might be frozen. So Saira, if you want to go.
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Saira Estrada. I am with NCVAN. I am the Outreach and Language Access Director. So I am so happy to be here and to help facilitate this conversation because really the reality of the situation is that y'all are experts in your own regions, right? And so I'm happy to be a part. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah, thank you. And then Betsy, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself in Justice Matters while we wait for.
Sure, I am happy to do that. I'm sorry, it turns out Cheryl is actually presenting from our office and it seems the Wi-Fi cut out. She's going to actually try to use her hotspot and just get right back in. So, oh, there she is. So great. Okay. Cheryl, so I'll just let Cheryl introduce herself in Justice Matters. Go ahead, Cheryl.
The Wi-Fi has to cut out the second it's time to talk. I'm Cheryl. Betsy, please call me or text me if my connection cuts out again.
I will.
But I'm Cheryl Chew and I'm an immigration attorney at Justice Matters. I've been here since about 2013 and we handle primarily humanitarian immigration applications for individuals who have been victims of human trafficking and other crimes in the United States.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, well, we'll just go ahead and kick it off. During the presentation, please feel free to ask any questions. You can put those in the chat and there may be some questions that we answer in the moment if it's like a clarifying question, but at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So if you have any examples of working with a survivor who's from an immigrant community that you want to kind of walk through or ask, you know, how does this work? Please feel free to do that without giving away any personal identifying information. And yeah, any other questions you have, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we will get to those throughout the presentation. So Cheryl, kick us off.
All right. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So thank you guys again for inviting me to speak, for being interested in this topic, and for, I'm sure, all of your intelligent questions at the end. As Leah mentioned, if there are any sort of clarifying questions that you know, are directly relevant to anything that I'm mentioning during my portion of the presentation, please feel free to interrupt, or you can drop it in the chat and someone will let me know to clarify that during the presentation. All right, so these are our objectives for today for my part of the presentation. I really just want to give as clear and concise an overview as possible, and with the understanding that I know you all have probably various interactions already with immigrant families and individuals who may have experienced things, crimes and other forms of exploitation and abuse. And so I really want to also be able to respond to any of your inquiries and the things that are really pressing that will be helpful for you. So I just want to give a broad overview of Justice Matters, our legal services, discuss some common barriers for immigrants that we've encountered and sort of have relied on to help sort of justify the scope and range of our services, understand why legal services are so important for immigrants and their families, describe the types of law that we handle at Justice Matters, which is family and immigration law, set expectations for when someone does qualify for a form of immigration relief and does submit an application for relief, then what happens after that? And then at the end, just quickly reviewing referral information for Justice Matters. And Leah had also mentioned that there will be a handout later on next week regarding additional referrals or resources that will go out to you all. Okay. Justice Matters, this is a little graphic that one of our staff members did pre-pandemic, but this is our staff. We're a pretty small team of comprised of people from a variety of backgrounds. We have a lot of legal professionals on our team, but also someone from master's with a master's in social work and master's of public health. And really what we strive to emphasize in terms of our services are trauma-informed values and trauma-informed legal services. A lot of the reason for that, as I'm sure you can gather, is working with people who have been victims of trauma and victims of crime often respond better to services that are better tailored for to address those sources of trauma or to address their responses to trauma. We provide free legal services in Durham and with offices in Durham and Raleigh in the areas of immigration and family law. Trying to get to the next slide. And our mission at Justice Matters, what we were sort of the basis of what why we were founded is to address the roots and repercussions of human trafficking. And within that, we really saw that the core legal services that were impacting a lot of individuals who were victims of human trafficking or potential victims of human trafficking or potential victims of exploitation and other traumas were the areas of family law and immigration law. Within our family law services, I'm just going to give a really brief overview that will sort of cover the highlights and sort of how it intersects with immigration. And then within immigration, I'll go into a little more detail since that's more my area as well. But with family law, the main goal is to address sort of the roots of this exploitation, to talk about, what is it that makes individuals really vulnerable to traumas and exploitation and other crimes, and how can we help support families that that may be in those situations. And then with immigration law, we'll discuss sort of a little bit of some of the common barriers that immigrants face, which I'm sure you can also name and have encountered a lot in serving the people that you serve. But really with immigration law, our goal is to be able to provide legal status for people who don't have legal status or relief from some of the difficulties that comes with not having legal status in the United States. So what are some common barriers facing immigrants in the US? This is a very non-exhaustive list, but it's some of the common things that we've really identified as our clients have continued to come to us and communicate with us about things that they struggle with. So one of the big things for, is language access and the inability to communicate in a primary language that where the country you're living in is. And there are a lot of service providers and a lot of government agencies that still do not provide services in more than just English. Even a court system is often a really difficult place for immigrants to navigate, given the very, very few interpreters on staff that they often have. Law enforcement often has also very few Spanish speakers on staff, let alone people who speak other languages other than Spanish. That's certainly one of the biggest issues that we see that has caused a lot of misunderstandings between our clients and other agencies or government officials, and that has led to negative consequences for them. Racism is also obviously a significant factor in terms of an immigrant's ability to sort of thrive in our current system. We hear a lot of comments and feedback from clients about situations they've encountered that very realistically and rationally would not have happened if they didn't look the way that they do. Limited immigration pathways. I think one of the common barriers and also misconceptions is that there are a lot of visas out there and people should just apply for visas before coming into the US. It is an extremely difficult process to be able to access various immigration pathways that will allow someone to come to the United States permanently or temporarily. Even applying for a visitor's visa or a tourist visa can often be a hindrance for individuals, let alone people who are potentially fleeing danger or violence in their hometowns, or people who are coming here wanting to join family members, or even people who are wanting to relocate here. It's an extremely difficult process with very, very narrow options for individuals to come over. There's also a common misconception that people who are arriving at the border are not coming legally. That's not always the case. A lot of people are seeking asylum at the border, and that is a legitimate legal pathway that allows people to come to the United States. But again, there are a lot of issues with that system that do result in a lot of additional harm to immigrants as well. Other common barriers include fear and uncertainty regarding law enforcement, court systems, and removal and deportation, again, tied to the fact of not having legal status or not having permanent legal status in the United States often creates a sense of fear, and that fear is often exploited by abusers, by people who are seeking to take advantage of immigrants. Lack of government issued identification, such as a state driver's license or employment authorization. This is a huge issue for a lot of undocumented immigrants, as I'm sure you already know. The inability to legally drive means that people are often racially profiled and pulled over for no reason, but then given tickets for driving without a license. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong individual, it could have very serious negative consequences for you as far if you're an immigrant without legal status, such as potentially ending up in jail. We've had clients who have been arrested for something as simple as driving without a license. And then having limited or no access to resources such as public benefits. I think what we see with a lot of our clients is that, they're doing everything they can to provide for themselves, to provide for their families, but they just are limited by what they legally have access to and what they're allowed to apply for, which puts themselves in a very vulnerable financial situation and makes them increases risk factors for them to be exploited by people who understand the gravity of their financial deficits. So then, given all of these common barriers, why are legal services so important? What do they get for some of our clients, and why do we strive to primarily address some of these common barriers through the provision of legal services? This little chart is just sort of to lay out how we tend to view benefits and impact of legal services or legal relief. This is not specific to just immigration. I think this is really for legal relief across the board. Within this context of this presentation, I'm going to keep it more focused on immigration, but also touch a little bit on family law, since we also handle family law at JusticeMatters. And so here we see how, I want to talk a little bit about how legal relief and the direct impact of legal relief can also offer public benefits and benefits to society as a whole. Within legal relief, what we're assisting someone with in terms of family law, in terms of immigration law, potentially other areas of law as well, is ultimately a clarity on what their legal rights and responsibilities are. This is something that a lot of people may not know, especially as immigrants. For people who are not familiar with the laws here, people who are not familiar with the culture here, it's an added barrier that prevents somebody from being able to understand how to conduct themselves, or what they might have access to, or what they should and should not be afraid of. And so being able to offer legal services, even just a consult where somebody, may not qualify for anything ultimately, can also provide that clarity that will equip them in order to be able to make better decisions. Legal relief can also improve access to justice. And so what I mean by that is, having an attorney's assistance in order to report a particular crime to law enforcement, to be able to help advocate on their behalf with a law enforcement agent, to ensure, or with a court system, in order to ensure that they are being followed up with, that the crime is actually being investigated, and that any types of victim services that they may qualify for through the court system or through the DA's office is at their disposal. Legal relief can also equip caregivers. And so what I mean by that is, within our family law context, we frequently represent individuals who are caring for children who are not their biological child. This means that while the caregivers are doing all the heavy lifting of caring for this child and raising this child who is not their own, they often don't have the legal tools at their disposal to make legal decisions on that child's behalf, such as being able to enroll them in school or make decisions about healthcare needs for that child. By representing these caregivers in obtaining a custody order, a legal custody order for this child, it means that they now have the legal tools in order to make those decisions that are necessary for that child's welfare. Immigration status or relief from removal. This one is pretty self-explanatory, but it's such a huge impact on individuals who don't have legal status here. So whether it's permanent legal status, whether it's a temporary relief from removal if they're in immigration court proceedings to be removed from the United States, or even if it's just a temporary status that allows them to have the ability to get a driver's license, these are all significant steps in creating factors that help protect individuals from exploitation or from being vulnerable to exploitation. And then other immigration related benefits, I mentioned employment authorization before. Other benefits may include being able to petition for family members, and being able to apply for legal permanent residency in the United States to be able to remain in the United States permanently beyond a temporary visa period. So then all of these legal benefits sort of lead to additional public benefits, such as eligibility for things like Medicaid, food stamps, and other Social Security related benefits or government related benefits that they would not otherwise be able to access. There are some things like subsidized therapy and medical services that individuals who have suffered trauma may not be able to access until after they have gained legal status or been approved for some sort of legal status. And so that's why we see such value, additional value in not just getting somebody something like employment authorization, but also access to systems and benefits. The driver's license, I kind of talked a little bit about the barriers of not having a driver's license. And so being able to apply for a driver's license in North Carolina is so huge for so many of our clients. Most of them are working and so need to be able to drive to and from work, or to be able to care for their children. And even just having something as simple as that can be life-changing and create a lot of security when they drive around without having to fear being pulled over and some sort of negative consequence happening as a result of them driving without a license. And a social security number, which obviously assists with being able to find employment and apply for even things like a proper phone plan. And then we have social benefits that really we're looking at a broader scale here of why is it so important to continue to provide this type of legal relief, and especially immigration relief, to undocumented immigrants in the United States. And so with all of these legal and public protections, we see social impact in terms of reducing risk factors to victimization or exploitation, offsetting fears related to lack of legal status, which also provides legal security and freedom for somebody who may have been a victim and whose abuser or perpetrator has used their lack of legal status to further control them or to exploit them. It broadens opportunities for education and employment. While anyone can go to public school here, they do not have access to college or higher education without, or most higher education without legal status. And then strengthens families and provides opportunities for family reunification. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that people get with legal relief is the ability to petition for certain family members. And we have often found that being able to do that has really impacted our clients in a positive way, in order to be able for them to be able to reunite with family members who may still be in their home country, or family members who are here but who also don't have legal status, who now can obtain legal status. And so what legal services are most relevant to victim survivors? Here is just a quick slide of or overview of our family law services. And within family law at JusticeMatters, we handle custody cases, guardianship, adoption, paternity and birth certificate issues, powers of attorney. And powers of attorney are basically it's essentially just a document that allows a parent or a caregiver to assign authority to another person to take care of their children in the event of an emergency. That's sort of the most common type of power of attorney that we handle at JusticeMatters. That comes up most often for undocumented immigrant caregivers who are worried about what happens if I get arrested by ICE, or what happens if I get pulled over and arrested by the sheriff and I need to pick up my kids from school. What happens then? And so a document like that will allow them to assign sort of emergency authority to someone who can step in their stead, just in case something happens to them. Our family law team also provides legal consultations through pro se centers, which is for individuals who don't have an attorney. And that is weekly on Tuesdays and bi-weekly also on Tuesdays in Wake County. And these are currently done by phone. It used to be walk-in appointments at the courthouse, at the local courthouse in Durham. And then I can't remember exactly where it was in Wake County. Betsy, you can drop that in the chat if you happen to know. But obviously, because of COVID, we've switched to scheduling via phone, but those are still happening and on a regular basis. And then with immigration law at Justice Matters, I'm going to skip I'm going to go through some of these in more detail on the next slide, but essentially we handle a lot of legal representation for individuals who have been victims of crime. We also handle DACA applications or DACA renewal applications. And that's just something that we've done since the program was announced in 2012. And I think we really see that as a prime example of how even temporary legal status, which is what DACA is, to just have work authorization in the US has been foundational in allowing kids who are here without legal status to be able to access services, benefits, programs, education, and employment that they never otherwise would have had access to. The core types of immigration relief that we handle at Justice Matters are special immigrant juvenile status, T visas, U visas, and VAWA self-petitions. And so really for here, what we're looking at again is for people who have been victims of some sort of crime in the United States. The exception would be for special immigrant juvenile status. It doesn't have to have happened in the United States. This is a form of relief for children. So in North Carolina, that's individuals who are under the age of 18 who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both parents. There's also T visas for individuals who have been victims of sex or labor trafficking in the United States. That includes people who have been victims of attempted sex or labor trafficking, so they don't necessarily have to have been trafficked. U visas for victims of crime in general. Most of the crimes that would qualify for U visas are felonies, with just a few exceptions. And then for some indirect victims of crime, and as an example, a parent whose minor child was, let's say a parent has a US citizen minor child who was a victim of sexual abuse. That parent who is undocumented may qualify for a U visa. The T visa and the U visa are sort of known as law enforcement crimes because they include a component of reporting to law enforcement, engaging with the criminal justice system to report the crime of which they were a victim. And then VAWA self-petitions are for victims of battery or extreme cruelty by an immediate family member. So for example, a spouse, an adult child, or a parent who is a US citizen or a US lawful permanent resident. This can include physical abuse, but it can also be solely emotional, verbal, or mental abuse. It does not need to include physical abuse. So then what happens after filing an immigration application? This is one of the most common questions that our clients are very eager to get to. And I hate that we don't have better answers for them sometimes, but a lot of times what happens is not very much. There is just a lot of waiting around with immigration law. And unfortunately, the wait times are historically increasing. Immigration processes are very, very slow. And oftentimes what you get as a result of submitting an application is not anything, nor no kinds of benefits until your application is actually approved. There are some exceptions. One of those for certain types of applications, one of those would be temporary employment authorization. Again, that's only for certain types of visas, and possible eligibility for public benefits. Again, that only for certain types of visas. Other than that, really what we tell clients and often talk to them about is to, make sure that if anything happens, if you have any encounters with law enforcement, if you get arrested for any reason at all, that you let us know, and that that you have a pending application, sometimes there are certain rights that kick in, or certain avenues that kick in once you do have a pending application. It's not usually a type of benefit, but potentially there is a lower risk of removal if somebody gets arrested and ends up in ICE custody, or if somebody ends up in immigration detention on the pathway to removal. There are certain, not laws, but essentially internal memos and priorities in place that may help individuals who have been a victim of a crime and who have a pending application based on that victimization. The primary thing that we always tell clients of what to expect with a pending application, or what their responsibilities are with a pending application, is to communicate with our office. Immigration eligibility and outcomes are very frequently impacted by a whole range of other things. Criminal matters, travel, changes in household, changes in address, marital status, even, somebody deciding to apply for a different type of visa as well. There's a lot of interactions with immigration law that that we ask clients to always keep us up to date on, because of the way immigration interacts with every other facet, or the way immigration processes consider every other facet of our lives. So finally, just to touch on how to refer clients to JusticeMatters or other legal service providers. And again, here, I just want to pause briefly to sort of emphasize the importance of referrals to a legal service provider in your area. I know y'all are probably from all over the state, and JusticeMatters may not provide service in your counties, in all of your counties, but in general, we always recommend any undocumented immigrant who has been a victim of any type of crime, or who may have been a victim of any type of crime, or type of exploitation or abuse, to have some sort of a consult with an immigration attorney in order to determine if there is any type of legal benefit or remedy that they may have access to. And one of the important things to consider is that, in general, legal advice statutorily needs to come from a lawyer, both because that's what the law says, and also for a lot of different reasons that could impact somebody's legal outcomes. So as an example, somebody who is an undocumented immigrant who makes a report to law enforcement could really benefit from somebody who is able to advocate on their behalf with law enforcement. Law enforcement may ask them for a written statement. That may not be a good idea, because it might contradict something else that they've said in the record. Another example is with family law. If somebody has been a victim of domestic violence and they want to now file a custody action, or they've left, they have their kid, and then they decide they want to file a custody action for their for full custody of the child, and before the abuser wasn't trying to gain custody of the child, but now in filing a custody motion, they've engaged with the court system and they've engaged with the abuser. In North Carolina, courts will split custody 50-50 unless there is a clear reason not to. And sometimes abuse or drug use or alcoholism that impacts the spouse but doesn't necessarily impact the child will still result in at least partial custody going to the abuser. And so to be aware of, what are some of the legal consequences of actions that you're taking. The one, just go back. The one caveat, or the one note I want to mention for immigration law as an exception, is that immigration representation actually can be handled by somebody who is not an attorney, but who is a DOJ or Department of Justice accredited representative. It's a separate certification that, that people obtain through training, and I think there's some sort of test and certification that allows them to handle immigration legal matters and represent individuals with immigration legal matters solely. And I think that's obviously a very good thing. The more service providers we have, the better. I did just want to flag, though, that anything outside of immigration, and immigration does have a lot of touch points outside of immigration, to ensure that there's always a legal representative involved if necessary. And then just generally, here is our referral information. There will be a handout that has more details on this, but if you want to take down the intake line just quickly, feel free to. And then we'll also have a list of other agencies. This is a non-exhaustive list, but these are some of the common agencies, that legal agencies that we have referred to in the past and commonly collaborate with. And that's it. I don't know if any specific questions came up about the slides as I was talking, but you know, I'll pass it over to Saira, and of course, happy to answer any questions y'all might have at the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cheryl. There haven't been any questions in the chat so far, but again, please feel free to ask, and we can also revisit any questions you have at the end. I felt like that was really helpful, and it was really clear. And I think sometimes that can be the issue, is you get into these conversations and then by the end you're like, I have no idea what I just heard. And I felt like that you laid it out really well. So thank you for that. And yeah, so now we'll pass it over to Saira, and she will talk a little bit more about advocates and what advocates can do.
Hi again. Let me share my screen. Thank you, Cheryl. Very good information. It's always important to have an attorney tell you all those things. And I did sort of have a question, Cheryl, and it's more of a question for the folks listening. Because they are most of them are advocates. Should folks be asking for people's immigration status?
Great question, and generally no. Are you talking about like in government officials and things?
I'm talking about as an advocate, should I ask an individual their immigration status? I mean, I know that government officials shouldn't be asking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's within discretion as far as what your services and relationship with that individual are. In general, if you're providing services to someone, I would encourage it to find out if somebody needs assistance with immigration options. I think I'm of the opinion that the more people who can get consults about that, the better. And, you know, some people just may not be interested, but so long as it's a safe place for them to share something like that, then I definitely encourage that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, on this end, we're going to be talking about other resources and linking the needs of the Latina survivors in the community. Like I mentioned before, you are all experts in your area as people that are doing the work there. And again, my name is Saira. I go by she, ella. I am the Director of Outreach and Language Access for the North Carolina Victim Assistance Network. And for those of you who don't know what NCVAN is, we support the rights and the well-being of surviving loved ones of homicide and those who have been hurt by violent crime. And so we do that by helping them understand the investigative process, the criminal process, providing post-trial advocacy, homicide support groups, and referring them to counseling. also, I wanted to mention that I am open to you all unmuting yourselves and asking questions whenever needed. A little bit about the language. I know that Cheryl was just mentioning what the language is, undocumented, but as a person that is not in the legal world and dealing with other individuals, I like to say immigrants with varying immigration status or immigrants with no immigration status. And the reason being is because the media has, over the years, has really put a negative connotation on undocumented immigrants. And so I like to just switch it up so people don't automatically shut down the conversation before it's had. And Latinx, we've been hearing Latinx for a while now, and it's still being used. However, it is a term that that includes all people of genders and gender nonconforming folks. But the thing is that a lot of international LGBTQ centers have been petitioning for us to stop using the X and instead use the E for various reasons. The X is not legible. You can't read or write it as nice as it would be a vowel. And in a lot of contexts, we X people out. And so the X is another example of us exiting some folks out. Other terms that you might see as far as Latina folks is the A or the O, the @ sign, the X, and the E. Again, I'm going to stick with the E because that is what most folks are requesting we use. All right, the objectives for today is to assist in expanding multidisciplinary partnerships in your community and implementing innovative strategies to help you provide better outcomes, gain greater understanding of how it is and how effective it would be to link these to your community and explore solutions to barriers like language access, health, employment, housing, and immigration, which Cheryl just talked about. So as we all know, the resources in a recent article I read, North Carolina's Latina population has increased by 40% in the last year, 40%. And so what does that look like? That is only 40% that was counted and that was that we were able to see, right? That doesn't account for everybody else that didn't participate in the survey. So 40%, which means that the community is outgrowing the services that are provided. So there is a huge service gap in our communities. And so all of these things continue to increase the barriers in our services for both DV and SA and any victim of violent crime. And so we want to be able to enhance the quality of life for folks that are already in our services. So quick definitions, a need is a physiological or psychological requirement for the well-being of an organism. A resource is a source of supply, support, natural feature, or phenomenon that enhances the quality of life. And community is joint ownership or participation, right? None of these include immigration status. These are just the needs. And I know Cheryl was talking about, I asked about the immigration status of whether or not we should ask. And I always struggle with that question because how do we do it without racial bias, right? How do you ask those questions without racial bias? And it is important for us to disclose, to be able to provide all the resources available to our clients. And so a good way for us to do it is to have a list of services, and people can opt into the ones they need versus us asking. But it is important for us to know so that we can provide those services. I do have this question. How many of you know what multidisciplinary teams are, and how many of you are still a part of it? For a while, North Carolina had a ton of multidisciplinary teams, and then it kind of just faded out. But how many of you are still participating in those? A good thumbs up would work. Okay, several. Yeah, those are amazing. I absolutely love them because it is a way for everybody to share internal information. For those of you that don't know, a multidisciplinary team is a group of people in the community who come together and coordinate responses to several things. We have the DV, the SA, and the human trafficking one. And sometimes they all work together and simultaneously because it's the same people usually at the table, right? So it helps bring community awareness, and it helps link all of these resources, and it helps the community build a sense of safety for immigrants and folks, not just immigrants, but for folks that need the service, and so that it flows simultaneously. And I'm over here playing with the little boxes. Oh, I just asked you. So who's at the table, and who should be at the table at a multidisciplinary team agency? You have your sexual violence agency, the culturally specific agency, any Latina survivors that are available and willing to participate. Those are very, very important, as they know the gaps better than anybody. Individuals that represent the community, healthcare providers, school system, court officials, law enforcement, religious entities, community officials, businesses, and community activists, and all service providers, or as many service providers as possible. Again, another thumbs up. How many of you have culturally specific agencies near you? Okay, so very few of you. And that's when it becomes really difficult, because the services are not there in languages that are needed or required, right? And which comes back to language access, which Cheryl also spoke about. And it is super important to have language access. How many of you have language access lines? Oh, you all, if you all are part of NCCASA, you all do. So if you didn't know that, now you do. NCCASA provides a great language access number and service. So please use it. They are phenomenal. I see somebody says that they are unaware of any. Anastasia, what area are you in? I have a list, and I intentionally don't send out the resources until we have these, until we have the training, so that I understand what I actually need to send out, instead of just bombarding everybody with a ton of information. But I'm assuming, oh, you're in Baltimore. Oh, there's a ton in Baltimore. We can talk offline. But I did a lot of work in Baltimore as well. And so going back to the strategies, if you haven't done so, assessing your community is very important in in finding out what the needs are, how to meet those needs. Public services need to be culturally and linguistically sensitive, right? There's, and in my language access training, I talk about, it's one thing to say you have a language line and that this is open to all folks, right? And it's another thing to open the door and help people walk through it, right? So those are two separate things. And it's very important that we understand the difference between just saying, oh, I have a language line, people are not using it, and versus I am being culturally and linguistically sensitive to meet the needs, right? And assessing and engaging and participating in the community as well. Review your agency's practices and policies to make them inclusive of immigrants and people of all ethnicities. That is also very, very important. I've worked with several organizations and agencies that have been harmful to other folks unintentionally, right? Because all of these things are unintentional. And Cheryl talked a little bit about, racism and all of that, and also the systematic oppression and systematic racism that exists, that is included in practices and policies that are sometimes unintentionally for the people that are working there, right? Because it was systematically set there for a reason. But as we're moving forward, we want to make sure that these practices and policies are inclusive of all immigrants and ethnicities and languages, right? So we got to make sure that we are culturally sensitive again. We want to be able to collaborate and develop and implement plans to provide better services. And so that, with the review, having anonymous surveys in your area, in your own agency, not just your area, in your own agency, will help you better understand what practices and policies might not be inclusive of folks, right? And again, if you have survivors that are willing and able to tell you where the gaps are, they'll be more than happy to show you and tell you most of the time, hey, there was this huge gap here, right? And so just be mindful and aware of those types of situations and things. It's really hard to provide culturally sensitive and linguistically sensitive services to folks if your policies and practices are not in line with those, right? So just make sure if you need help us addressing them or reviewing them, let me know. I'm happy to help in that as well. So as folks in your community, have you all seen things that are working or not working for you? I know a lot of you said that there weren't a lot of culturally specific agencies. I know Marcela is in Chapel Hill, and y'all have a great culturally specific agency there. And Cheryl, I think you're in Durham. So again, great resources there. Even Wake County has great resources, but what counties are we seeing with no culturally specific agencies around, other than Baltimore, Maryland? So all of these things,
Hey, Saira.
Hey.
Sorry, I just wanted to point out, someone put in the chat rural counties.
Okay, thank you. It's really hard to incorporate all of these things and to find resources for immigrants with no immigration status or with limited immigration status in a city. So I know it's extra hard in rural communities, especially when you don't have that support, right? Sampson County, yeah. Yeah, and that's what we see, right? Sampson County, I know the Outer Banks also has a huge Latina population and not enough services, right? And so we have to get creative in order to address some of these barriers, right? And so, you know, the first step, and, you know, it's in my title, language access. I always talk about language access because that is one of the first steps, right, into creating a safer environment and to addressing a lot of these needs is being able to communicate back and forth with individuals. And so creating a language access plan, it should be, if it's not already implemented, should be language access policy, because you all already have the plan through NCCASA. But if your organization does not have a language access policy, it needs to have one. Hiring bilingual, bicultural staff, that's always a plus, not always a realistic goal in rural communities, which is why the language line becomes a backup, right? Distribute information, and this last one, host events in Spanish for Latina community. I can't stress that enough. If you are trying to do outreach to the Latina community, especially in a rural community, partnering up with, you know, organizations that are already there. There might not be a culturally specific agency, but they're going to church somewhere. They're going to grocery shopping somewhere. They're finding their medical health needs addressed somewhere, right? And it might not be a traditional medical doctor. It might be a curandero. For those of you that know what a curandero is, help me.
I wonder if I've seen it at Dollar Tree or Walmart.
So if a curandero, I guess it's I don't want to say a witch doctor, a healer. Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, a healer, a natural healer with herbs and spices and massage and indigenous practices. Yeah. So thank you. But so finding those key individuals, I know that El Pueblo had done this great work, and they were doing, and this was when they were doing it statewide. They were implementing, they were having trainings for folks in rural communities to be leaders in their community, to be the links and liaisons, because there were no rural culturally specific areas with culturally specific agencies. Yeah, so there, again, talking about healthcare, there are plenty of ways that local healthcare providers can help. I know in Iredell County, the culturally specific agency there partnered with the DVSA agency and was able to get the agency to provide 2 pair of glasses per month, free with consultation, lenses, and everything. So that is a thing. If you reach out, folks will help. Most of the time, we'll try to find a solution for those needs. Where did I go? Okay. Emergency Medicaid. I know we're talking about, I know Cheryl mentioned that if you don't have, that one of the pluses of having immigration status is having medical health care, Medicaid, Medicare. But there is a such thing as emergency Medicaid, which is for people that cannot pay or do not have insurance. And it also applies to folks with no immigration status or varying immigration status. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And again, many health clinics in North Carolina have sliding scale programs to assist, but not all folks are going to clinics. So it's always important to ask those folks if what they have done in the past, what they have or what they want to do going forward if they don't have any medical health care plan. They might not feel comfortable in a medical doctor and would prefer indigenous practices. So this is I took this from the Medicaid slide, a Medicaid organization website. And it talks about, it is exactly what I was telling you about. It's the Medicaid emergency, what is covered, what the application process is. And so anybody who is living in North Carolina can access emergency Medicaid, right? It is emergency Medicaid. It is not for continual care. So for example, delivery, pregnancy, or even the rape kit, and if they have to be hospitalized, all of that can be covered under emergency Medicaid. I know that there's different funds for it, but there is such thing as emergency Medicaid, and it is for a 60-day period. So that is available to immigrants with no immigration status and with varying immigration status. And you can go to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services for that one. For strategies in assisting with food and other needs, these are probably some that you already know and have in your pocket, right? Food stamps for monthly allowance. The other thing I want to say is that if the immigrant has U.S. citizen children, they don't necessarily qualify themselves, but their children qualify for a lot more, right? And so what they end up doing is they end up taking a part of it out, and they just give the children Medicaid, or they just give the children food stamps and things like that. So school, breakfast and free lunch, food banks, diaper banks, these are all places that should not ask about immigration status. Not saying that they don't, because lately a lot of folks started asking for immigration status, and a lot of those practices haven't changed. And so just confirming, again, when you're going to do a referral, when you are dealing with immigrant survivors or victims, you want to make sure that where you are referring to, that you know their immigration policy and practices. You don't want to send them to an agency that might report. Employment strategies for, like Cheryl was saying, it is so important to have a worker's permit or a Social Security in order to be able to find employment. But you, again, creating those partnerships with folks that are already employing individuals can help. There are, be proactive in creating and promoting immigrant entrepreneurship. There is a lot of businesses that don't require especially if you're building your own business, a startup that doesn't require a lot of background checks like that, and it doesn't require a Social Security, such as, doing lawn care businesses and things like that, cleaning, selling food, and that type of stuff. Letters of recommendation are always needed and helpful for individuals. So what are some things that you all are doing or not doing as far as employment?
Saira, one thing that we often talk with our clients about that we try to emphasize is, while we cannot advise them to work without authorization, we can't legally advise them to work without authorization in the US, we always tell them, you can get, and if they don't already have one, they can get an individual tax identification number, or ITIN, and they can file taxes using that. And taxes are often a really key, helpful document if they're applying for any type of immigration relief. So that's one thing that we communicate with clients about. The other thing is that regardless of if they're working or where they're working, they should never affirmatively check any type of box or anything that states that they are a US citizen or US legal permanent resident. If that's a requirement, then find another option, because there are severe legal consequences for false claim to US citizenship or US legal status. And so those are sort of the main things that we advise clients who realistically, obviously we know people have to work and they have to be able to support themselves and their families. And so those are the things that we often advise to look out for.
Right, and it can have a big effect on their, if they qualify later on in life for residency or citizenship, and they get a fine or a fee, or what is that called, Cheryl? The penalized, right? They get penalized for some time if they forgive it, right? But yeah, that is why I'm saying, like, if they can do entrepreneurship, that would probably work best than putting themselves at risk of false claims to being able to work in the United States legally. Housing. Housing has been an issue for a long time because a lot of housing requires a Social Security number. And so as of December 2018, public housing authorities put out a guidance around that folks that have been approved or that their U visa has been submitted and is going to be processed, they are now eligible to apply for public housing authority as if they were citizens. And until they get their final determination letter. So as Cheryl mentioned, the U visas take a long time, so that is housing for quite some time unless something happens in housing and they have to be released from that. But public housing authority is an option. A lot of housing authorities don't publicly announce this, so it's important to have. And if they get denied, it's important for you all to know that this is an actual thing, an actual practice. I think Wake County and Durham County and even Orange County are already in line with this because it has happened so often. And but in rural communities, it's a little harder, but it's not impossible because it is put into practice already as of 2018. And also mixed families or families with varying residency status can also apply for public housing, and they subsidize it, right? And so, for example, if rent is $500 at public housing and 4 out of 5 are citizens or have residency status and 1 doesn't, they divide by 5, and then the person that doesn't have immigration status pays that amount, right? So those are some ways to find housing solutions. Being part of your continuum of care in your local area, working with DSS. DSS has a lot of resources available to them that don't necessarily require everybody to be a citizen, just be a mixed family, right? And that's what we call mixed families, a family that has individuals with mixed immigration statuses. Build relationships with local landlords. North Carolina, and Cheryl or Betsy, help me if I'm wrong, but North Carolina does not necessarily require folks to put social security numbers in their applications. They just have to be uniform throughout their practices. Like, you either ask all of them or you ask none of them. And so if you build relationships with landlords, like an apartment complex does not necessarily require you to, the law does not require you to have a social security in order to rent. That is just the best practices for those apartment complexes. So if you build relationships with local landlords, you know, there are better chances of a person with no immigration status to be able to rent. So this is what we were talking about, the strategies for housing under the federal law. It is a federal law that U visa applicants can apply for public housing. I can send that out. I'll look for it. It was in 2018 when I saved it, so it's got to be in there somewhere. Again, immigration, collaborate with immigration attorneys who can assist, build relationships with them. For those of you that know the BIA, I don't think it's called BIA anymore, it's DOJ accreditation. So they're an accredited board of individuals that can assist in immigration paperwork, and sometimes representation depending on how accredited they are. But again, I can't stress it enough, build relationships with immigration attorneys in your area. If there are none in your area, build some outside. I know there's national ones, there's statewide ones that can assist, legal aid, JusticeMatters. All of those are key folks to have in mind when you're dealing with immigration. You do not want to recommend anything to an individual without having them already talk to an immigration attorney. Anybody have any questions? I think that was the end of my PowerPoint, so. Yeah.
Thank you. All of our presenters, or just the ones who feel comfortable, I know that Cheryl and Betsy gave the contact info for JusticeMatters, but I know, Saira, you said and Tasha may want to reach out to you afterwards to talk about Baltimore. So do folks feel comfortable putting their contact info or appropriate contact info in the chat for people to follow up?
I put in my email.
That works. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks to both of our presenters today. I felt like this was really helpful and I think does a really good job of an overview of all these issues that we face when we're working with survivors who come from immigrant communities. And I think the folks who brought up the rural communities, I think that that's, you know, where a lot of these issues definitely seem even more challenging because there are fewer resources. And so it's kind of like, what do we do? And advocates should never give legal advice, but similarly to the way that advocates present survivors with their options when it comes to reporting or seeking medical treatment and things like that, it's helpful for advocates to be able to talk to immigrant survivors about what their options are without telling them what to do or giving them, you know, direct guidance, but to say, because there are a lot of people who don't understand our immigration system. So being able to kind of just point them in the right direction can be helpful. Are there any questions or experiences that folks on the call had that they want to get clarification on or anything like that? Yeah, Marcella, you raised your hand. Feel free to unmute.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the folks that presented. Again, I'm Marcela, use she, her pronouns. I work at the Carolina Latinx Center. I guess I wanted to understand, so when I read Survivors, I thought this was going to be a little bit more focused on access to resources for survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence, et cetera, as well, in their immigration journeys or experiences, or how to provide them with emotional or culturally competent support, et cetera. Do you all have any of those types of resources or even just things to share? Because I am on a college campus, and so oftentimes we have like counseling centers and we have places for students to go to, but not necessarily folks that are either identify as Latinx or Latine or have any understanding around, you know, traumas that students or folks might have gone through, et cetera. I was grateful to have some of this experience, this information for just like immigration in general, but I guess a little bit more specific to the experience of the overlap or the intersection between sexual assault and Latinx identity.
I see Evelyn raise their hand. Evelyn, do you want to respond to Marcella or do you have a different question?
No, I'm sorry, I have a different question.
Okay, we'll get to that in just a second.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to respond to Marcella.
Yeah, Marcela, it's a little more complicated because every case is so individual, and everybody needs something different. And as far as the overlap between Latine and immigration and sexual assault, it's just like any other, right? With the option to provide information and things like that to get a relief of immigration status, right? And the resources are still limited, but being on a college campus, there are a lot more options because college campuses, if they're on a college campus and they're immigrants, they're either in here with a different type of status, right? They're probably in school with a student visa or something like that, which allows them to access the health center in campus, and it allows them to access the campus counseling center and different resources. So it's different for campuses, I would say.
Cheryl, do you want to add anything?
No, I think the only thing that I would mention as far as legal services, I know there's not a ton of not necessarily a ton of overlap in terms of thinking through like family and immigration legal services and the direct needs of somebody who may have been a victim of sexual assault or abuse on a school campus. But I think one of the things that we've that we could provide, or one thing that we've tried to make accessible is just resources, so people know, like, this is where you can refer to if XYZ, or here's some handouts or pamphlets or a referral sheet of things that people can self-select or opt into. So it's like, oh, this is a legal service provider that does immigration services. So maybe that's something relevant to me. Say someone's on a college campus with DACA and they now want to find out, do I reported something that happened to me and I want to speak with an immigration attorney. So that, I mean, it's not necessarily the most direct way of providing those services as far as what our organization does, but I think that could be an option as far as just providing a handout or the knowledge of these are the resources that people can opt into and to self-select into.
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
And I don't know if this also helps answer your question, Marcella, but from the advocacy perspective, when it comes to, working directly with the survivor, which kind of sounds like what you're also asking, I would say, kind of, what Cheryl talked about at the beginning, and that list of barriers that survivors from immigrant communities face when it comes to either reporting or seeking help afterwards. I think just validating that, I think, in my experience doing advocacy on a college campus, students are already really apprehensive about reporting in general because it's really scary and they don't know what's going to happen or if they're going to get in trouble. And then with also being an immigrant who may have varying immigration status, that just kind of adds to that. So I think as a service provider and an advocate who's working with survivors who are in that situation, just validating that. And if they're saying they don't want to report because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, one, again, validate and say, I understand why you feel that way. And then two, I think that's why it's so helpful to know like what rights exist so that you can say like, according to law, you're not going to get in trouble for this, or whatever your campus policies are and things like that can be really helpful to ease people's fears. But it can also just be helpful when you're talking with community partners that you may be working with, whether that's campus law enforcement or other people on campus who may be asking questions like, well, they're not cooperating. You can kind of act in your advocacy role by saying like, well, this is why they might not be cooperating. This is why they might be scared. Can we talk about this? So I think, employing all your advocacy skills and meeting this person where they are can be really helpful.
Leah, I'll also add that debunking some of those myths. I know that with previous administrations have come different policies and practices. And so debunking a lot of that information because sexual assault victims fall under VAWA confidentiality and different things, right? And certain protections that come along with that. And so just, assuring them that these are some protections that they do have is very important as well in them continuing to seek assistance in their journey.
Awesome. That was really helpful. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Okay. And then Evelyn, your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you for the great presentation. I have a question for the special juvenile status. When you file for that, are the kids are going to have access to benefits as a Medicare, Medicaid, or they have to wait until the process complete? Because we saw that many of those teens or little kids, they really need dental help, that medical vaccination, and is that process will provide that, or how is this process will allow them to have some kind of benefits as a social security number or that kind of benefits?
That's
Thank you.
great. Yeah, that's a really great question. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but unfortunately for those applications, there is no type of legal status or temporary benefits or authorization that gets granted until the process is completed and that child has been approved. And unfortunately, that is one of the visa types where there are no benefits until until the process is complete. That particular type of application initially requires a custody order issued by a judge in their local county that adjudicates the child to be abused, abandoned, or neglected. While that doesn't provide access to those public benefits, that's always the first step in doing that, and it's possible that there are certain services and agencies, government or nonprofit, that Saira also touched on, that an individual may be eligible for. And I would encourage for any child in that type of situation, or any provider who encounters a child in that type of situation, to try to explore some of the local resources in the area, because unfortunately, from an immigration standpoint, there are not really legal avenues to access services before that approval. I think there was one other.
Thank you.
It'll come to me, but yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I wish it was.
Yeah, really answered.
But
I know.
Yeah.
I know this is a process that will take time, but I guess that's what we need to face and try to do it in the better way with the correct attorney that really understand the situation, because it's a complicated immigration path to the legalization. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the SIJS, that one in particular, I'm glad you brought up, because I think that's one where there is I think across the board, there is obviously an under-identification of individuals who could benefit from legal assistance, who do not access legal assistance. But I think especially for children, a lot of kids obviously will not be thinking about that and will not know how to ask for that or where to go to ask for that. They may also not be active victims of crime or any type of crime other than, let's say they're here now living with their dad and their mom abandoned them when they were a baby. And so they've never known their mom. This child, maybe now 12 in school and could potentially qualify for SIJS, but why would they ever think of that? And so I think that's something where it's not directly related to, serving victims of sexual abuse or sexual assault, but I think in providing services to individuals and coming across people who have children who are not US citizens, not US legal permanent residents, where maybe they talk about things like, my child does not have access to Medicaid and can't access certain benefits, or I don't get food stamps for any reason at all. That's sort of a red flag of like, here are some legal resources if you want. Maybe that's a good option to reach out to do an immigration screening for you or the child.
Cheryl and Evelyn, I'll also add that because they are a child, and especially if they are school-age children, the McKinney-Vento provides a lot of services for children that are abandoned or homeless, right? So the McKinney-Vento, there is a liaison in every school district that assists with all of that, medical health, housing, food. That's their job to give them. There's funds for that, right? And so I would suggest to reach out to the McKinney-Vento liaison in your region.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much for that information. Mhm. So do we need to request that to a social worker at the school, or do we share that information with parents, or what will be the best way to reach them?
So each school has a different liaison. So the school has one, and then the school district has the main one, right? So you can go to the principal's office with the parent, or well, not the parent, but with the child, and say, hey, they qualify for the McKinney-Vento program. And then they'll link you to the social worker or the liaison in the school, and the school will link you to the liaison in the school district.
Great, thank you very much.
But I'll post that on the chat here.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we are a little bit past time. So thank y'all for sticking around a little bit longer. If anyone has any additional questions, feel free to email me, and I can either email or Saira and get the answer for you, or you can email them directly. But please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we will get you connected to who you need to talk to. I went ahead and I posted a link in our chat to NCCASA's resources. We are in the process of translating a lot of those to Spanish. I don't think they're all complete yet, but if you go on our resource page and you type in if you're looking for tags, and you type in Spanish, you can find Spanish resources. And so if you need any of those for any survivors you're working with or for yourself, feel free to access that. Again, if you are an NCCASA member, you do have access to the language line. So if you're not a member but are interested in becoming one, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat again, and we can talk about that. And finally, I just really, again, appreciate all of our presenters today for the great information and for y'all to be here. So thank you. You will receive an evaluation following this presentation. And once you fill out the evaluation, you'll receive a certificate. So if you want a certificate or you need credit for attending this or proof that you attended, you have to fill out the evaluation first. I think that's it. So thanks everybody for being with us. And this is recorded, and again, we will be sending out handouts as a follow-up to this next week, so look out for those. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks all for joining.